Have you ever noticed that the more you explain yourself, the weaker you start to sound? You give one reason, then another, then a third, just to be safe. And somewhere in all those extra sentences, the room stops believing you, even though nothing you said was untrue. Here's the idea behind this video. Every time you over-explain, you're not making your point stronger. You're handing the other person power, quietly, without meaning to. Not power in a dramatic sense. Just the small, everyday kind, the kind that decides who gets to feel sure of themselves in a conversation and who has to keep working to be believed. Most people think over-explaining is just being thorough. It isn't. It's usually fear wearing the costume of communication, and once you see that clearly, you'll start noticing it everywhere, in your own voice, and in how differently people treat you the moment you stop. Let's start simple. Why do we do this in the first place? Over-explaining almost never comes from wanting to inform someone. It comes from a fear that a short answer won't be enough, that if you don't add more, you'll be misread, doubted, or rejected. So you keep adding. One more sentence, one more reason, hoping that somewhere in all those extra words you'll finally feel believed. Here's the part most people miss. That fear is rarely about the person standing in front of you right now. It's usually about someone from a long time ago, a parent who needed everything justified before they'd accept it, a teacher who made you defend a simple answer until you doubted it yourself, a partner who twisted your short replies into proof that you were hiding something. Somewhere back there you learned that a plain answer wasn't safe. So you built a habit. Add more, explain further, leave no gap the other person could use against you. The problem is, that habit doesn't know the danger is over. It keeps running the same program today, in rooms that have nothing to do with where it started. A coworker asks a simple question, and your body reacts like it's back in that old, unsafe room, even though nobody here has actually threatened you. That's not weakness. That's an old alarm going off in the wrong building. Underneath the habit of over-explaining sits something most people never look at directly. Not just fear of being misunderstood, but a quieter belief, one that's harder to admit. The belief that your word, on its own, isn't enough. That you have to earn belief every single time, through effort, through evidence, through enough sentences stacked up that nobody could possibly doubt you. This belief hides well because it doesn't announce itself. It just shows up as a habit, as something that feels like good manners, like being clear, like being fair to the other person. But watch what it actually does. Every extra sentence you add is a small vote against your first one. If the first sentence was already true and already enough, nothing more should be needed. The fact that more keeps coming says something quieter underneath. Something like, "I don't think you'll believe me yet." This is uncomfortable to sit with, but it's worth sitting with anyway because it explains something confusing. Why does over-explaining so often make things worse, not better? Watch what happens to trust while someone keeps talking. It usually peaks early, right after the first clear sentence, and then slides the longer the explanation goes on. By the fourth or fifth reason, the listener isn't absorbing new information anymore. They're wondering why so much was needed for something that simple, and that wondering is exactly where the power shifts. The listener stops receiving what you said and starts deciding whether to accept it, which is a very different position than the one you had a few sentences ago when your first answer stood there, plain and unquestioned. This shows up in almost every part of life once you know where to look. At work, it looks like defending a decision long after anyone actually challenged it. Someone asks why you chose one approach over another. You answer once, clearly. If they pause or raise an eyebrow, the instinct is to explain again, differently this time, hoping a new angle finally lands. By the third round, you've said the same thing 3 different ways, and the conversation has quietly shifted from your decision to whether you can out-argue your own doubt out loud in front of them. In relationships, it looks like justifying a feeling before anyone has questioned it. Someone says they're upset about something small and immediately follows it with 3 reasons why they're allowed to feel that way, as if the feeling needed a permit before it could exist in the room. A partner who actually cares doesn't need the case built. They need the feeling stated plainly, once. In families, it looks like redefending an old decision every time it comes up. A parent brings up a choice from years ago, and instead of a brief, "That's what I decided and I still stand by it," out comes the whole explanation again, the same one given a dozen times before, as if the right wording will finally make it land. It usually doesn't, because the parent was never missing information. They were expressing disapproval, and disapproval doesn't dissolve under more words. It just gets a longer opening to keep going. Even small, low-stakes moments carry the same pattern. A late reply to a text turns into a paragraph explaining exactly where you were and why, when a simple "sorry, just saw this" would have done the same job with none of the anxious padding. None of these moments actually needed a paragraph. They needed a sentence, and the discomfort of offering only a sentence is almost always smaller than it feels right before you say it. So what does it actually look like to face this, instead of just knowing about it? The first step is noticing the moment it starts. Over-explaining usually begins with a small internal flicker, a flash of worry that what you just said wasn't enough. That flicker shows up fast, often before you've even finished your first sentence. Learning to notice it, without immediately obeying it, is the actual skill here. You don't have to stop the flicker from happening. You just have to stop it from automatically turning into a second sentence and a third. The second step is writing it down, honestly, the way you'd admit something to yourself in private. Pick a moment from this week where you over-explained something small and finish this sentence. "I kept talking because I was afraid that if I stopped, they would." Whatever comes next, write it exactly as it is, without softening it. Think I wasn't believed. Think I was in trouble. Think they'd think less of me. Seeing the actual fear in plain words instead of letting it stay vague takes away a surprising amount of its power. The third step is paying attention to your body in the moment it happens, not just your thoughts. A tight chest right before you launch into an explanation nobody asked for. A rush of words that comes out faster than you meant them to. A specific kind of exhaustion after a conversation where you know, deep down, you said the same thing 4 different ways. These are signals worth listening to. The mind can talk itself into believing an explanation was necessary. The body usually knows sooner that something else was actually going on. The fourth step is practicing the pause. After you say something true and simple, there's a moment of silence that feels unbearable if you're used to filling every gap. Let it sit anyway. It feels far longer to you than it does to the person listening. What feels like 10 awkward seconds is usually 2 or 3 ordinary ones, barely noticed by anyone but you. The fifth step is practicing this somewhere small before you try it somewhere that matters. A stranger, a cashier, a distant acquaintance. Somewhere the stakes are low enough that a short answer, sitting there uncorrected, doesn't feel dangerous. Building the muscle in small rooms makes it available later, in the bigger ones, when the old habit would otherwise take over without asking permission. It helps to know exactly what you're aiming for, so it's worth naming the difference between a short answer that lands well and one that doesn't. The difference isn't really about length. It's about tone. A brief answer said with a clenched jaw or a rushed defensive edge doesn't read as calm confidence. It reads as suppressed anxiety, and people notice that just as fast as they notice an over-explained answer. The goal is a short answer delivered the way you'd state an ordinary fact, the same easy tone you'd use to say the store closes at 9. Try saying the same 6 words out loud 2 different ways, once like you're bracing for an argument, once like you're simply stating something true. Notice how differently they land, even though the words never changed. The delivery underneath a short answer often decides whether it gets accepted calmly or challenged, more than the words themselves ever do. A few mistakes tend to sneak in once people start practicing this, and it helps to know about them ahead of time. The first is confusing short with cold, stripping out warmth along with the extra words, when the goal was never to sound harsh, just to stop mistaking length for kindness, when the length was really just fear, wearing a friendly tone. The second is holding back the extra sentences out loud and then replaying the whole explanation privately for the next hour, rehearsing what you should have added. That defeats the purpose almost as much as saying it would have, because the anxious pattern is still running, just quietly now instead of out loud. The third is testing this only in easy situations and assuming it's mastered, when the harder rooms, a parent, a partner, a boss, will always take longer, and that's expected, not a setback. Here's what happens once you actually start doing this, and it's worth naming, honestly. It gets harder before it gets easier. The first few times you stop yourself from adding the extra sentence, it will feel wrong, even rude, even though it almost never lands that way to the person listening. You might walk away from a conversation replaying it, sure you sounded cold, sure you should have said more. That discomfort is not a sign you did something wrong. It's the old alarm, the one that's been running since long before this conversation, protesting that the danger hasn't actually passed. It has. The alarm just hasn't caught up yet. There will be conversations where the old habit wins completely, where you catch yourself 3 sentences deep before you even notice what's happening. That's not failure. That's an old pattern doing what old patterns do, running automatically until it's been interrupted enough times to finally lose its grip. Each time you catch it a little sooner, that's real progress, even on the days it doesn't feel dramatic. Something quieter also starts to shift underneath the conversations themselves. You start to trust your own first answer a little more, not because anyone told you to, but because you've started to notice again and again that the first answer was usually enough all along. That noticing builds on itself. The 10th time you say something once and it lands fine is easier to believe than the first time, and by the 50th time, the old fear that built this whole habit starts to look less like a fact and more like an old story that stopped being true a long time ago. If any of this is landing for you, it might help to spend a little time each day writing down moments where you caught yourself over-explaining, even small ones. Just noticing the pattern on paper, without judging it, tends to loosen its grip faster than trying to white-knuckle your way through it in the moment alone. It helps to know roughly what to expect, so a hard week doesn't feel like proof the whole approach failed. The first couple of weeks are usually the clumsiest. You'll catch yourself mid-explanation more often than you stop yourself before it starts. And that's normal, not a sign you're doing this wrong. Around the 1-month mark, most people notice the pause coming a little more naturally, a small gap opening up between the urge to add another sentence and actually acting on it, even if the gap doesn't always win yet. By 2 or 3 months of practicing this regularly, the shift tends to become noticeable to the people around you too, not just to you. High-stakes moments, a conflict with someone you love, a conversation you've been dreading for weeks will still pull the old habit back out sometimes, even after real progress everywhere else. That's not a reset. It just proves the hardest rooms were always going to take the longest, exactly as expected from the start. Be gentle with yourself through this. The habit of over-explaining didn't form overnight, and it won't unwind overnight either. Every time you catch it a little sooner than the time before, that's real. Even on the days it doesn't feel like enough. Having a few short, ready phrases on hand makes this easier, because the hardest part is usually the first few words, not the discipline to stop after them. A simple, "that doesn't work for me," said once and left alone, covers most moments where a request needs to be declined. A plain, "I hear you, and I'm going to stick with this," works for moments where someone keeps pushing after you've already answered once. Even something as small as, "that's just how I feel about it," can close a loop that would otherwise invite 3 more rounds of justification. None of these need to sound clever or rehearsed. The point isn't a perfect line, it's a stopping point short enough that adding more to it would obviously be optional rather than necessary. Having one ready in advance makes it far easier to actually use in the moment, instead of freezing and falling back on the old habit simply because nothing else came to mind fast enough. Not every follow-up question deserves a longer answer, but some genuinely do, and it's worth being able to tell the two apart quickly. A real question usually sounds curious, open, Easy. Someone tilts their head, asks what led you to that, and actually waits to hear something new. That kind of question deserves a real answer, given once, plainly. A fishing question sounds different, even though the words can look almost identical on paper. It often comes with a raised eyebrow, a pause that seems to expect you to keep talking rather than actually asking anything, a tone that already sounds unconvinced before you've said a single word in response. This kind of question isn't really asking for information. It's testing whether you'll cave under a little pressure. Answering it with more explanation usually confirms to the person asking that pressure works on you. Answering it with the same short, calm sentence you already gave usually ends the testing far faster than any new material would. This distinction takes practice to feel out in real time, and it's fine to get it wrong sometimes. Offering more detail to a fishing question, or staying too brief with someone who genuinely wanted to understand you better. The goal isn't perfect accuracy every time. It's building the habit of pausing long enough to actually notice which one you're facing instead of reacting automatically the moment any question shows up at all. Here's the objection that comes up almost every time this idea gets raised. Doesn't context matter sometimes? Isn't explaining yourself just decent communication? Yes, sometimes. And the difference is worth being precise about. A real explanation given once, when it actually adds something useful, is good communication. A manager explaining the reasoning behind a decision helps a team understand direction. A partner explaining why something upset them helps the other person actually learn something true about them. None of that is what this video is describing. What this video is describing is different. It's the second explanation and the third and the fourth, given not because new information exists, but because the reaction wasn't the one you were hoping for. The test is simple. Did the second explanation add something the first one didn't already say? If yes, that's communication. If it's the same point, dressed in new words, hoping this phrasing finally lands, that's not communication anymore. That's negotiating with your own fear, using someone else's face as the finish line. A related question comes up often, so it's worth answering directly. What about the times you're actually wrong? Doesn't a longer explanation make sense then, since there's genuinely more to account for? Even here, the instinct to over-explain usually works against you. When you've actually made a mistake, a long, detailed account of everything that led up to it often reads less like accountability and more like an attempt to spread the blame thin enough that no single part of it lands too heavily. A short, direct admission, "I got that wrong, here's what I'll do differently," tends to land better than 5 minutes of context nobody asked for. People trust a clean admission more than an elaborate one, for the same reason they trust a short answer more than a padded one. Even here, length tends to read as discomfort with the thing being said, not as thoroughness. This doesn't mean context never matters when you've made a real mistake. If someone genuinely needs to understand what happened to prevent it next time, that context is worth giving. The difference is whether the extra detail actually helps their understanding, or whether it's really serving your own need to feel like enough has been said to be forgiven. Only one of those helps the situation. The other one just draws it out. There's one more layer worth naming, because it explains why some people struggle with this more than others. If you grew up needing to justify your existence in a room, your feelings, your choices, your right to take up space at all, over-explaining isn't really about the specific thing you're explaining today. It's an old, learned belief that you have to earn your place every time you speak, that silence or a short answer might cost you something you can't afford to lose. That belief made sense once. It might have kept you safe in a house, or a relationship, or a job where a short answer really did get punished. The problem isn't that the belief was wrong back then. The problem is that it's still running the same program now, in situations that don't actually carry the same danger. Recognizing this isn't about blaming yourself for a habit you didn't choose. It's about finally updating an old map that stopped matching the world you're actually living in. Think about what a short answer used to cost, if you can trace it back. Maybe a plain no, as a kid, got met with a lecture that lasted 20 minutes, so eventually a no came preloaded with 3 reasons, just to shorten the lecture. Maybe disagreeing with a parent's version of events, even gently, got treated as disrespect. So agreeing, or at least sounding like you were building toward agreement through enough careful explanation, became the safer move. None of this required anyone to sit you down and teach it directly. It got learned the way most deep habits get learned, through years of watching which answers ended the conversation peacefully and which ones extended it. This also explains why the habit shows up strongest with certain people and barely at all with others. A short answer to a stranger rarely triggers the old alarm because the stranger has no connection to the original danger. The same short answer to a parent, a long-term partner, or an old authority figure often triggers it instantly because some part of the brain is still treating that specific relationship as the one where the original rule was written. This is worth noticing. If your over-explaining is worse in specific relationships than others, that's not random. It's usually a clue about exactly where the habit was first built. Workplaces often reinforce this same conditioning in adulthood in ways that feel professional rather than personal, which makes them harder to spot. A boss who questions every decision until you've defended it 3 times over teaches the same lesson a strict parent might have taught decades earlier, just with different vocabulary. Eventually, everyone on that team learns to over-explain by default, not because it produces better work, but because it's the only response that ever seemed to satisfy that particular boss. Leave that job, land somewhere with a calmer manager, and the habit often keeps running anyway for months, because habits built under pressure don't automatically know when the pressure has actually lifted. Once this starts to shift, even a little, something noticeable changes in how conversations feel. Answers that used to take 4 sentences start taking 1. Silences that used to feel unbearable start to feel almost comfortable, sometimes even useful. A small space where the other person actually has to sit with what you said instead of immediately being handed something new to react to. People around you tend to notice this before you're fully confident in it yourself. Fewer follow-up questions because there's less left hanging that invites them. Fewer people testing whether you'll cave if they wait long enough because you usually don't anymore. A different kind of respect starts showing up, not because you became colder, but because a short, steady answer carries a kind of weight. A long, anxious one never quite manages. You were never actually unclear. That was never the real problem. The extra sentences weren't adding understanding. They were quietly asking for reassurance, hoping enough words would finally produce the sense of being fully believed, a feeling no amount of explaining was ever actually able to guarantee. Not everyone will respond well to this shift, and it's worth expecting that honestly. Someone who benefited from the old version of you, the one who could always be talked into a fuller explanation, might describe the new version as distant or difficult or suddenly cold. That reaction usually says more about what the old pattern was doing for them than it says about anything you're doing wrong. A person's discomfort with your new brevity is information about them, not proof that the shorter answer was a mistake. Before the video ends, it's worth doing something simple, right now, instead of just nodding along. Think of one specific person, the one who came to mind earliest while you were watching this. Finish this sentence honestly, either out loud or in your head. Around this person, I over-explain, because I'm afraid that if I don't, they'll think. Whatever finishes that sentence is usually closer to the truth than any of the actual explanations you've given them over the years. It might be think I'm lying, think I don't care, think less of me. Whatever it is, that single honest sentence is worth more than 100 more carefully worded justifications because it finally names the real thing instead of managing around it. Think about the specific person this brought to mind while you were watching. A boss who makes you build a case for every decision. A partner who gets 3 reasons for every feeling you try to share. A parent who still hears an old defense every time a familiar topic comes up. Whoever it was, notice that you already knew, before this video even mentioned it, exactly which conversations tend to run this way. That's worth paying attention to. The pattern isn't hiding. It's been visible the whole time. It just hadn't been named yet. Naming it is where this starts, not where it ends. You don't have to fix every relationship where this shows up right away. You just have to notice the next time it happens that the extra sentence forming in your mind isn't information. It's an old fear, reaching for one more chance to be believed, in a room that, most of the time, already believed you the first time you spoke. If this reached you, try it today on something small. Say the true thing once. Let it sit there, uncorrected, even if it feels strange. Notice how much less it costs you than you expected. Tell me in the comments what you tend to over-explain the most. And if this was useful, the next video picks up exactly where this one leaves off. I'll see you there.